She ran from the most dangerous man in Korea and hid his son for 7 months. But tonight, the baby is dying, and the only person who can save him is the one man she swore she would never call again. One phone call will end the life she built. One phone call will bring him across the ocean. And once Kang Tae-hyun discovers he has a son, there is no running, there is no hiding, there is only him. If you've ever loved someone you had to leave to survive, this story is for you. Watch until the end. Hit like. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The hospital smelled the way all hospitals smelled. Antiseptic sharp enough to sting the back of the throat. Underlaid with something older and more honest. Something that had no clinical name but that every person who had ever sat in a waiting room at 2 a.m. understood instinctively. It was the smell of things going wrong. Of bodies failing the people inside them, of time running out in increments too small to measure until suddenly there were none left. Imani Brooks had been sitting in a plastic chair outside Pediatric Intensive Care Unit 6 for 47 minutes when the attending physician, a compact Korean-American woman named Dr. Yoon, who wore her exhaustion like a second skin, came through the heavy double doors and stopped in front of her with the specific expression of someone who had delivered bad news so many times that the face had become a practiced instrument rather than a genuine one. Mrs. Brooks. Ms. The correction came out flat, automatic, the way Imani had trained it to come out over the past 14 months. Not Mrs. Never Misses anymore. Dr. Yoon adjusted without blinking. Miss Brooks, Micah's condition is deteriorating faster than we anticipated. The bacterial meningitis has progressed to the point where we need to begin an aggressive treatment protocol immediately. But there are complications with his blood typing that we need to discuss. Imani sat very still. She had learned stillness from a man who used it as a weapon, and she had repurposed it as armor. What complications? Micah has an extremely rare blood type, Rh null. It affects roughly 1 in 6 million people globally. Without access to compatible blood for potential transfusions during treatment, the risks escalate significantly. Dr. Yoon paused. This blood type is almost always inherited paternally. We need his father's medical history, genetic markers, any known conditions, family history of... His father isn't in the picture. The words landed between them like something dropped from a height. Dr. Yoon looked at her for a long moment, with the particular patience of someone who had heard every version of that sentence. Ms. Brooks, your son is 7 months old. He has bacterial meningitis that has already caused measurable swelling around his brain. We need this information, and we need it now, not tomorrow, not after you've had time to think about it. She leaned forward just slightly, just enough to close the professional distance by a degree. I understand this is complicated. I understand there are reasons. But right now, the only thing that matters is that little boy in there and what you're willing to do to give him a fighting chance. Imani stared at the floor. The linoleum was the color of old bone. She had been staring at it for 47 minutes, and she had not noticed it until this moment. She noticed it now. I need a few minutes, she said. You have 5, Dr. Yoon said, and went back through the doors. Imani sat there for one of those minutes and did not move. Then she reached into the pocket of her blazer. She had come straight from a late client call, hadn't even gone home to change, had gotten the daycare emergency call while standing in a parking garage in downtown Boston with her keys in her hand. And she pulled out her phone. The contact was not listed under his name. She was not that careless. It was listed under a number string that looked like a billing reference code, something she had set up 14 months ago when she was still rational enough to think she would never actually use it. That it was just a precaution, just a safeguard, just the kind of thing a sensible woman kept tucked away the way you kept the number for a locksmith, even though you never intended to lock yourself out. She had been locked out of every safe room she had ever built for herself. She stared at the number, 7 digits away from the end of the world. She pressed call. It rang twice. Then it connected, and the silence on the other end was the particular silence of someone who had already seen the incoming number and made a decision before picking up. Not startled silence, not confused silence, prepared silence, alert silence. The silence of a man who had trained himself never to be caught off guard by anything, and who had still, apparently, not deleted her number either. Imani. His voice was exactly what she remembered, low, precise, accented in a way that had always made English sound like a language he had conquered rather than learned. Kang Tae-hyun's voice was the vocal equivalent of a locked room, controlled surface, no indication of what was behind it. She had practiced this. She had run it in her head 100 times over the past 14 months. On nights when she couldn't sleep and lay in the dark with the baby monitor crackling softly beside her, imagining every possible version of the conversation she would never have. She had the words. She had the sequence. She had the tone. None of it survived contact. Tae-hyun, her own voice came out steadier than she deserved. I need you to listen to me. Don't say anything until I'm finished. A pause so brief it barely existed. Speak. I have a son. She stopped. Restarted. We have a son. His name is Micah. He's 7 months old. He's in a hospital in Boston, and he is very sick, and the doctors are telling me they need your medical history and your blood type because... The silence changed. It was still silence. He had not made a sound. But something in the quality of it shifted in a way that Amani felt in her sternum, a pressure change, the way the atmosphere shifts in the seconds before a storm breaks. She had spent 2 years learning to read the silences of Kang Tae-hyun because his silences contained more information than most people communicated in paragraphs. This silence said, everything I thought I knew about the world just stopped being true. Say that again, he said. Very quiet, very controlled. The control was the terrifying part. You heard me. I heard you. Say it again. She closed her eyes. We have a son, Tae-hyun. He is 7 months old. His name is Micah Jaewon Brooks, and he has your blood type, and he is dying, and I need you to... I'm coming. The line disconnected. Imani sat in the plastic chair with the dead phone pressed against her cheek and felt the floor she had spent 14 months building shift beneath her feet, like something built on sand that had finally, after all that patient construction, met its tide. She had met Kang Tae-hyun at a corporate law conference in Singapore 4 years ago. She had been 31, 6 years out of Harvard Law, and the sharpest associate at the firm well enough to be sent to represent their sole office interests at an international trade negotiation that had nothing to do with her specialty, except that her supervising partner had looked at her across a conference table 3 days before departure and said, "You don't panic, Imani. That's rarer than you think," and handed her the brief. She didn't panic. She had grown up the daughter of a public defender in Baltimore who argued cases in courtrooms where the stakes were human lives. And she had internalized early that panic was a luxury that cost exactly as much as it provided, which was nothing. She read the brief on the flight, marked it up in red, and walked into that conference room in Singapore with the confidence of someone who had already decided she was not going to lose. Tae-hyun had been sitting on the opposing side of the table. He was the principal of Kang International, a global holding company with legitimate interests in shipping, real estate, and technology infrastructure. What the brief had not told her, what she would not fully understand until much later, until it was already too late for the information to change her choices, was that Kang International was the above-ground face of something considerably older and less legitimate, a network with roots in the Korean underworld going back 4 decades, a syndicate that had survived regime changes and economic collapses and law enforcement crackdowns by being smarter and more patient and more ruthless than the things trying to kill it. None of that was visible across the conference table. What was visible was a man of 35 who was extraordinarily still in a room full of agitated people, who listened more than he spoke, and who, when he did speak, spoke with the precision of someone who had thought about every word before it left his mouth. He was not conventionally handsome in the way that the word usually worked. There was something too severe about the architecture of his face for conventional, but there was a quality of absolute self-possession about him that was more interesting than handsome and considerably more dangerous. He had looked at her once, at the beginning of the session, and she had thought, this man does not look at things casually. The negotiation had taken 3 days. Imani had held her positions, challenged 3 clauses that her client's previous representatives had accepted without reading, and walked away with terms that were measurably better than what anyone had expected. Tae-hyun had been on the other side of 2 of those challenges, and when they were done, he had come around the table as the room was clearing and said, in that carefully constructed English of his, "You read everything. That's the job." Most people read the summary. Summaries are written by the person who wants you to agree with them. Something had shifted in his expression. Not warmth exactly. Not quite that. More like recognition. The look of someone encountering a thing they had not expected to find in a particular place. "Have dinner with me," he said. She should have said no. She knew she should have said no. There were a dozen professional reasons to decline and 0 professional reasons to accept, and Amani Brooks was, above everything else, a professional. She had built her entire adult life on the precision of that identity. She did not make impulsive decisions. She did not mix professional contexts with personal ones. She did not have dinner with men she had just spent 3 days fighting across a negotiating table. She said yes. 2 years later, she was married to him and living in a penthouse apartment in Gangnam and slowly beginning to understand the shape of the thing she had married into. It happened gradually, the way most truths that are being kept from you happen. Not in a single revelation, but in accumulation. A conversation that stopped when she walked into the room. A meeting in his home office with men whose names were never offered, and who looked at her with a specific kind of assessment that had nothing to do with her as a person and everything to do with what she represented. A phone call at 3 in the morning that sent him out of their bed without explanation. His face closed down to something that was not her husband's face, but was. She was beginning to understand the face of the other thing he was. She had asked him directly once, the way she asked things, sitting across from him at their kitchen table. No preamble, no softening, the brief open on the table between them in the figurative sense. "What are you actually running, Tae-hyun?" He had looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Legitimate international businesses. You've reviewed the financials." "I've reviewed the financials that I was given access to." Another pause. "The rest is not your concern." "I am your wife." "Yes." He said it without apology, without gentleness. "You are. And I intend to keep you that way, which means there are parts of my life that will not be your concern. This is not a negotiation." It was the most honest thing he had ever said to her, and it was the moment she understood that the life she had agreed to live was smaller than she had believed, that there were rooms in this marriage she would never be permitted to enter, that the man who had looked at her across a conference table in Singapore with something that felt like recognition had decided, at some point between that dinner and the altar, that love was compatible with secrecy in a way that Amani Brooks' entire legal mind knew it was not. She had stayed for 8 more months. She had stayed because she was in love with him, genuinely, inconveniently, against all the evidence, in love with the version of him that was quiet in the mornings and made coffee exactly the way she liked it, without being asked, and sat on the floor of their living room at midnight sometimes and played guitar with the kind of unself-consciousness that was the only window she had ever found into what he was like when he was not performing control. She had stayed because leaving felt like failure, and Amani Brooks did not fail at things. And then she had found out she was pregnant, and the calculation had changed entirely. She had not told him. She had thought about it. She had run every version of the conversation in her mind with the same methodical attention she gave to legal strategy, and every version ended in the same place. Tae-hyun looking at her across some surface or other and saying, with that absolute precision of his, that children were not possible. He had said it once, early in their relationship, before they were married, in a tone that was not an opening for discussion. He had said, children would only become targets. He had said it the way he said things that had already been decided, things that were not arguments but facts. She had believed him, so she had made her decision. She had taken 3 days, which was 2 days longer than most decisions took her, and she had packed 2 bags, and she had walked out of the Gangnam penthouse on a Tuesday morning in November while Tae-hyun was in a meeting, and she had gotten in a car, and she had not looked back. Not once. Because she knew herself well enough to know that if she looked back, she would find a reason to stay. And any reason she found would eventually lead to her child growing up inside the blast radius of something she had never been allowed to fully see or understand. Boston had been her mother's city. Her mother had died 4 years before Singapore, and the apartment she'd left Amani had been sitting in a property management situation that generated just enough rent to keep it viable. Amani had broken the lease agreement, bought out the remaining tenant, and moved in with 2 suitcases and a secret, and the particular grim efficiency of someone who has already grieved the life they are leaving and is now simply executing the exit. She had rebuilt. She was good at rebuilding. It was, she sometimes thought, her most durable skill. She had passed the Massachusetts bar within 4 months, joined a mid-sized firm as senior associate, and been managing 3 major clients independently by the time Micah was born in late spring. She had a babysitter she trusted. She had a system. She had a life that was hers, entirely hers, built on no one's permissions. She had been so careful. She had been so certain. Dr. Yoon came back through the doors at the 4-minute mark. Amani was already standing. "His father is coming," she said. "From Seoul. He's—" She stopped. How to explain Kang Tae-hyun to a hospital? How to say, "The man who will be walking through your front doors in the next few hours is not a man you manage or redirect or put on hold, and the people who will be with him will be armed, and the best thing this hospital can do is be exactly what you need to be, which is the place that saves my son. He'll be here within the day. He may bring his own medical team. You'll want to get administration involved before he arrives." Dr. Yoon studied her with professional neutrality. "Is there anything I should know about the situation?" "No," Amani said. "Yes, he will do anything the doctors ask of him. He will not be a problem. He will be—" She searched for the word. "Focused." "And you? Are you all right?" Amani looked at her. "Can I go in and see my son?" Micah was so small. She knew he was small. She had been watching him grow for 7 months, had measured every ounce and every inch with the particular intensity of first-time motherhood amplified by the fact that she was doing it alone. But the hospital made him smaller. The crib rails and the IV lines and the monitoring leads attached to his chest made him smaller in the way that machinery always made the human body look smaller, reduced to a thing being managed, a problem being processed. His skin was warm. Too warm. She could feel it when she pressed her palm to his forehead. A heat that had no business in something so small. A heat that his body was using to fight something she couldn't see and couldn't fight for him. His eyes were closed. His breathing was shallow and labored in a way that she tracked with each rise and fall of his chest, counting automatically, unable to stop counting. "Hey, Bug," she said. Her voice came out wrecked and she didn't try to fix it. There was no one here to perform composure for. "Hey, I'm here, I'm right here." She sat in the chair beside the crib and held his hand. His fingers were barely longer than her thumbnail. And she talked to him the way she always talked to him when she needed to believe something was going to be all right. She told him about the building they lived in, about the way the river looked in the morning from their window, about the song she'd been trying to teach herself on a secondhand guitar she'd bought from a neighbor because she'd seen Tae-hyun play once, and something about it had never entirely left her. She did not tell him that she had just called his father. She did not tell him what that call was going to cost her. Tae-hyun landed at Logan International Airport 9 hours and 41 minutes after the call disconnected. Amani knew this because the text came from a number she didn't recognize, not from him, but from someone managing logistics on his behalf, that said only ETA 20 minutes. Dr. Kim Sung-jin traveling with the group. Please have administration ready to receive. The group. She had thought about the word group for the 47 minutes between receiving that text and the moment the elevator doors opened on the ICU floor and Kang Tae-hyun walked out of them. He was wearing a dark suit with no tie, the collar open at the throat, and he looked exactly as he always looked, which was like a man who occupied space with the deliberate specificity of someone who had considered every alternative and chosen this one. He was not alone. There were 4 men with him, 2 of whom she recognized from Seoul, 2 she didn't, and behind them a Korean physician she assumed was the Dr. Kim from the text, carrying a hard case that looked medical in origin. But the men around him were background. They had always been background. When Tae-hyun walked into a room, the room reorganized itself around him, whether it wanted to or not. His eyes found her immediately. She stood up from the waiting area chair, and they looked at each other across approximately 15 feet of hospital corridor and 14 months of silence, and everything that had happened in both. He crossed the space between them without hurry, stopped 3 feet away. His face was— She searched for the word and couldn't find a comfortable one. Controlled was accurate but insufficient. Still was accurate but insufficient. There was something underneath the control and the stillness that she had never seen on him before and could not immediately name. "Where is he?" Tae-hyun said. "Through those doors. They've been waiting for your blood type results and the genetic history. Dr. Yoon is, show me. Not where is the doctor, not how is he doing, not I need to be briefed. Show me. She showed him. The moment Tae-hyun saw Micah, he stopped walking. He stopped in the doorway of the PICU room, one hand braced against the frame, and he looked at the child in the crib. Imani was behind him and could not see his face, only the line of his shoulders and the way his hand tightened against the doorframe. Just once, just briefly, the fingers pressing hard into the painted wood, before releasing. He stood there for 9 seconds. She counted. She couldn't stop herself. Then he walked to the side of the crib, and he looked down at Micah, and he was quiet for a long time. The baby's chest rose and fell. The monitors beeped their steady and different rhythm. Tae-hyun reached out and put one hand, very carefully, on the top of Micah's head. He didn't say anything. He just held his hand there. His eyes did something that Imani had seen in 2 years of marriage exactly twice before. Something that his face was not designed to do and that his control could not entirely suppress. He breathed out. One long, controlled breath that Imani recognized as the thing he did when he was preventing himself from feeling something in public. Then he turned to Dr. Kim and said in Korean, "Whatever they need, everything." Dr. Kim was already moving. The next 4 hours were medical, and Imani spent them mostly in waiting rooms, which she had been doing for 11 hours at that point and had developed a disassociated competence with. Tae-hyun's team integrated with the hospital team with a clinical efficiency that might have been impressive under other circumstances. Dr. Kim turned out to be a pediatric specialist of apparently significant reputation. At one point, Imani heard Dr. Yoon say, with unconcealed surprise, "You wrote the Kim Park protocol for neonatal RH null management," and heard Dr. Kim say simply, "We should review the imaging together," and they disappeared into a consultation room. Tae-hyun sat in a chair 12 feet from the PICU doors and did not move. The men who had come with him from Seoul positioned themselves in ways that Imani recognized from another life. One near the elevator, one near the stairwell door, 2 in the corridor. They were not visible in the aggressive way. They were visible in the way of objects that have been placed deliberately, whose presence makes the geometry of a space feel different without your being able to articulate why. The hospital security supervisor had come to speak to Tae-hyun 40 minutes after his arrival. Imani didn't hear the conversation. Whatever Tae-hyun said, the supervisor had gone away and not come back. She sat 10 feet from him in the same row of waiting area chairs, and they did not speak for 2 hours. Finally, she said, "I know what you're thinking." He didn't look at her. "No," he said. "You don't." "Tae-hyun, why didn't you tell me?" It came out flat. Not a question. Not an accusation. Something older and more exhausted than either. She had prepared for this conversation too. She was beginning to understand that preparation was useless. "Because you told me. Before we were married. You said," "I know what I said." "You said children would only become targets. You said," "I know what I said, Imani." The flatness of it cut her off. She sat with it for a moment. "So then you understand why." He turned and looked at her then, and his face was doing the thing she couldn't name. "No," he said, very quietly. "I don't understand why. Because whatever I said before, he existed. He was in the world. He was real, and you didn't—" He stopped, pressed his jaw. "You kept my son from me for 7 months. I kept my son safe." The air between them went very still. "That's not what this was," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is. That's exactly what this was." He looked at her for a long time. Then he looked away, back at the PICU doors. His jaw was set. His hands were flat on his thighs. The stillness about him had taken on a different quality. Not the controlled stillness she knew, but something raw underneath it, something that was working hard to remain contained. "He has my blood type," he said at last. "Yes." "And my—" He stopped. "The cheekbones. He stopped again. "Yes," she said, softer. "He looks like you." Something moved across his face, fast and gone. "He looks like both of us," she added, because it was true, and because something in her needed to say it. "He has your cheekbones and my eyes and your stubborn mouth and my hairline. And he has this expression he makes when he's thinking about something, this very specific scowl, and I see it, and She stopped. I see you. Taehyun said nothing for a long moment, then, tell me about the past 7 months. She told him. Everything. The pregnancy, the birth, the babysitter whose name was Carmen, and who sang to Micah in Spanish, the first time he rolled over at 4 months, and the way she had called her sister Areze in London and screamed about it for 10 minutes on the phone. His laugh, the specific quality of his laugh, which was enormous and disproportionate to his size, and which she had been known to manufacture fake airplane noises just to hear. She talked for a long time, longer than she had intended, while the hospital moved around them in its nighttime rhythms and the monitors beeped through the PICU doors, and Taehyun sat beside her and listened with the absolute focused attention that had been one of the first things she'd ever noticed about him. The way he listened like he was memorizing. She talked until she ran out of words. He's going to be all right, she said finally. Less statement than petition. Yes, Taehyun said. Not comfort, certainty. The way he stated things that he had already decided would be true. You don't know that. No, he agreed. But it's what's going to happen. She thought about arguing. She didn't. Dr. Yoon and Dr. Kim came out together at hour 14. Micah had responded to the modified treatment protocol. The brain swelling was stabilizing. The fever had broken. He was not out of danger. They were clear about that. They were both careful and clear about that. But the trajectory had changed. The numbers were moving in the right direction. Imani's leg stopped working for a moment. She caught herself on the wall. Taehyun was at her side before she had processed that she needed steadying. His hand under her elbow. Not gentle, not soft. Just solid and present, and there. She would have preferred to not need it. She took it anyway. Can we see him? She said. Yes, Dr. Yoon said. One at a time initially, and then together, Imani said. She heard the word come out, and was not entirely sure what she meant by it, whether she was asserting something or conceding something or simply stating a logistical preference about the next 15 minutes. Dr. Yoon looked at them both. Together, she confirmed. They went in together. Micah was still and warm and smaller than the room and breathing with a new quality that Imani's body recognized before her mind caught up with it. Breathing like someone working less hard than before. Breathing like someone who had made a decision about continuing. She stood on one side of the crib. Taehyun stood on the other. Between them, this small, improbable person who had been a secret for 7 months and was now, irrevocably, a shared fact. Taehyun looked at his son for a long time. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and produced a business card, which struck Imani as such a wildly inappropriate object for this moment that she almost laughed. But he placed it on the crib rail, face down, and she realized it was not a business card. It was a photograph, small and worn at the edges, and she had never seen it before. She couldn't see what it showed from her angle. She didn't ask. He just held it there, 2 fingers on the edge, while he looked at Micah. I'm not leaving, he said, to her. Not to the room, not to the air. To her. Imani looked at him across the width of the crib. Taehyun. I'm not leaving Boston without him. I'm not leaving, and I'm not... He stopped, started again, more controlled. I missed 7 months. I won't negotiate on what comes next. She felt something tighten in her chest that was not fear exactly, but was adjacent to it. This isn't the time. I know. He put the photograph back in his pocket. But I'm telling you now so there's no confusion later about what my intentions are. She stood with that for a moment. Outside the room, through the window in the door, she could see 2 of his men in the corridor. Could see the shape of the thing that had just entered her life again. Not as her husband, not as the man she had run from, but as something she didn't have a category for yet. He's named Micah, she said. Micah. He said it carefully, like he was testing the weight of it. Micah Jaewon. Something moved across his face again. You gave him a Korean name. She didn't answer. Some admissions were too large to make out loud. Some truths told themselves. Taehyun looked back at his son. Micah, he said again, softer, and reached down, very carefully, and adjusted the blanket where it had slipped from one small shoulder. The gesture was so ordinary that it undid something in Amani's chest that she had spent 14 months carefully reinforcing. She looked away before he could see it. They sat together in the PICU room as the Boston morning came in gray and slow through the high window, and neither of them spoke much. And Micah breathed, and the machines reported his numbers in patient intervals. And Amani sat with the particular awareness of a woman who has made a decision she cannot unmake, watching the man she had fled sitting across from her in a hospital chair, watching his son breathe. She had planned so carefully. She had built so precisely. She had made every choice with her eyes open and her mind clear, and her son's safety as the only variable that mattered. And now Kang Tae-hyun was in Boston, and he knew, and the life she had constructed on the premise of his not knowing was already beginning to show the cracks that form in things built on temporary foundations. He was not leaving. She believed him. She had always been able to tell, with Tae-hyun, the difference between what he said and what he meant, and when they were the same thing. They were the same thing now. Around 7 in the morning, when the light had shifted enough to call it day, Tae-hyun's phone vibrated against his leg. He looked at the screen. His expression did something small and unpleasant. "What is it?" she said. He looked up at her. The unpleasantness in his expression had been replaced by something careful and considered, which was almost worse. "It appears that someone at this hospital filed a report when I arrived," he said. "Flagged my presence, my name." A pause. "It has been noticed." She went very still. "By whom?" He looked at her. "People I was hoping would not notice, yet, that I am here." He put the phone away. "People who will find it very interesting that Kang Tae-hyun flew privately to Boston in the middle of the night." Another pause. "People who will now start asking questions about why." The room felt smaller. "What does that mean?" she said. "It means," he said carefully, "that certain individuals now know that I have a reason to be in this city, and those individuals have ways of finding out what that reason is." He looked at Micah, then back at her. "It means that the private life you have been living for the past 14 months is no longer private." The silence stretched. "Tae-hyun." "Yes." "What kind of danger are we talking about?" He was quiet for a long moment. In the corridor outside, she could see one of his men moving with a kind of deliberate casualness that she recognized as the opposite of casual. "The kind," he said finally, "that I spent 2 years trying to make sure never touched you." The machines beeped. Micah breathed. And Amani Brooks sat in a hospital chair in Boston and felt the walls of the life she had built begin to come down around her brick by careful brick, and there was nothing left to do but decide what she was going to build next. The discharge didn't happen for another 3 days. 3 days of Tae-hyun in Boston, which meant 3 days of his men in the corridors and his Korean medical team conferring with Dr. Yoon in rapid bilingual exchanges, and the hospital administration walking around with the specific expression of people who have been handed a situation that no policy manual had prepared them for. The head of hospital security had come back twice. Both times he had left looking like a man who had been politely shown a door and chosen, rationally, to walk through it. Imani watched all of it from the interior of a controlled exhaustion that was starting to feel structural. She slept in the chair beside Micah's crib in increments, woke with her neck locked and her back making arguments she didn't have time to address, drank the coffee that appeared on the tray table every morning without knowing who was leaving it there. On the second day, she went back to her apartment for 4 hours to shower and change and stand in the middle of her living room and look at the evidence of the life she had constructed. The framed photo of Micah at 3 months, the secondhand guitar in the corner, the bar exam certificate on the wall next to her Harvard law degree, and feel it all becoming something that had already happened rather than something that was still happening. She went back to the hospital. Tae-hyun was in the chair she had vacated. He had a laptop open and was working, which she had expected. She had never known him to stop working, even in the middle of crises, perhaps especially in the middle of crises. But he had positioned the chair so that he could see Micah directly without turning his head, and the laptop screen kept going dark from inactivity because he kept forgetting to type while he was watching the baby breathe. She noticed this. She filed it away in the part of her that was still, despite everything, a lawyer. The part that collected evidence and weighted and revised its conclusions based on what the evidence actually said rather than what she had decided to believe. Micah improved in steady increments. By day 2, he was awake for short periods, blinking at the world with the particular unfocused intensity of an infant encountering existence. And on the afternoon of the second day, when he was awake and Imani was holding him, and he made the enormous laugh, disproportionate to his size, occupying the full available acoustic space of the room, Taehyun looked up from his laptop, and the expression that crossed his face was one she had no armor against. "He does that a lot," Taehyun said. "Constantly," she said. "He thinks everything is funny. He thinks the ceiling fan is the funniest thing that has ever existed." Taehyun looked at the ceiling fan, looked back at Micah. Something moved in his jaw. "Can I—" He stopped, started again, with effort. "Can I hold him?" She looked at him for a moment. Then she stood up and crossed the room and placed Micah in his father's arms. Taehyun held him like a man who had never held a baby before. Correctly, carefully, with the rigid precision of someone following instructions from memory. And Micah looked up at him with complete openness and grabbed one of Taehyun's fingers and held on. Taehyun looked down at his son and stopped breathing for approximately 4 seconds. Then he breathed out, and something in the set of his shoulders changed. Imani sat back down and watched, and said nothing. They released Micah on the morning of day 4 with follow-up instructions and prescriptions and the particular exhausted relief of parents leaving a hospital with a living child. Taehyun's SUVs were waiting at the discharge entrance. 3 of them, black, the kind of vehicles that communicated something specific to anyone paying attention. 2 of his men transferred the medical equipment Dr. Kim had insisted on retaining for follow-up monitoring. Imani buckled Micah into the car seat with hands that were steadier than she felt. The drive to her apartment building was 12 minutes. Taehyun sat beside her in the back seat and looked out the window at Boston moving past. And she could feel him cataloging everything: the building's sightlines, the street patterns, the distance between her front door and the nearest corner. She recognized the process because she had watched him do it in Seoul 100 times, in restaurants and hotel lobbies and the lobbies of office buildings. The way he moved through space, like a man who was always running contingencies. He turned from the window when they pulled up to her building. 12 floors, he said. 14. 1 elevator bank. Yes. No garage access. There's a public garage across the street with sightlines to your primary entrance. He turned and looked at her. Imani, this building is not defensible. It's an apartment building in Boston, Taehyun. It doesn't need to be defensible. His expression didn't change. It does now. She turned to face him fully, which was something she had been avoiding in the close quarters of the back seat because the proximity made it harder to maintain the particular emotional distance she was trying to maintain. We need to talk about that, about what you said in the hospital, about what comes next. Yes, he said, we do. Not now, not in the car, inside. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Micah, asleep in the car seat between them, one fat fist pressed against his cheek. He nodded once. Carmen was waiting outside the apartment door. Imani had texted her from the hospital, and Carmen was 19 and capable and had Micah's schedule memorized better than Imani did, and she looked at the 2 men who had accompanied them up the elevator with the specific expression of a 19-year-old encountering something she had not been briefed on. Miss Imani, hi, She looked at Taehyun. Carmen, this is... Imani paused 1 beat too long. Micah's father, Taehyun said, smoothly and without drama. Carmen's eyes went wide. She looked at Imani. Imani met her eyes with a look that said, I will explain later, please just be normal for the next 10 minutes. Carmen was, blessedly, a practical young woman. Okay, she said. I restocked the formula and the wipes. He was due for a nap about 40 minutes ago, so he's probably... Oh, he's already asleep. Perfect. She looked between them. Should I come back tomorrow? Yes, Imani said. I'll increase your hours, Taehyun said at the same moment. Carmen looked at them both. I'll come back tomorrow, she said carefully, and left. Imani put Micah down in his crib and stood in the doorway of the small second bedroom that she had painted pale yellow in her third trimester, standing on a stepladder with her back aching because she had decided that her child was going to have a room that looked like intention rather than improvisation. She stood there until his breathing deepened into sleep. Then she went back to the living room where Tae-hyun was standing at the window, looking out at the street below. "Sit down," she said. He turned from the window. "Please," she added, because she was tired and this was going to be a hard conversation, and she didn't want to have it with him standing against her window like a monument. He sat, on the edge of the couch, not in it, the posture of a man who does not fully commit to furniture. She sat across from him in the armchair and put her hands on her knees and looked at him directly. "You said in the hospital that people now know you're here, that Micah's existence is no longer private. I need you to explain to me exactly what that means." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, with the directness she had always both valued and resented in him, "There is an organization operating out of Mexico with significant presence on the east coast of the United States. They have been attempting for approximately 8 months to expand their territory into areas where my organization has existing interests. The situation has been," he paused, "tense. Tense," she repeated. "They operate with a specific philosophy," he continued, and his voice had taken on the tone he used when he was briefing his own people. Level, clinical, no editorial. "They believe that the most effective pressure is not financial and not operational, it is personal." He looked at her steadily. "They believe in targets." The word landed exactly as he had intended it to land. "You said that," Amani said. "Before we were married. You said children would become targets. I believed you. That's why I know." He cut her off, and it wasn't sharp, it was tired. "I know why you left. I understood it, even then." He pressed his palms together, his elbows on his knees, and looked at the floor for a moment. "But the specific individuals who concern me now were not the specific concern then. The situation has changed. How long have you known about them?" "I identified them as a primary threat approximately 5 months ago." She did the math fast. 2 months after I left." "Yes." She sat with that. "So the danger I was trying to protect Micah from, specifically, did not fully exist yet when you made your decision." He said it without triumph, without "I told you so." Just the fact, flat and honest. "The world you left was one version of danger. The world you have been living in for the past 14 months is a different version. One that I was unable to warn you about because you had..." He stopped. "Because I had no way to reach you." The air in the apartment was very quiet. Micah's baby monitor sat on the coffee table between them, crackling faintly. "Why didn't you look for me?" Amani said. He was quiet for a moment. "I did," he said. She blinked. "What?" "I had people look. I knew you were in the United States within 3 weeks of your leaving. I knew you were in Boston within 6 weeks." He met her eyes. "I did not pursue further because..." He stopped again. The stoppage was not because he didn't have the words. He always had the words. It was because these particular words cost him something. Because you left. You made a choice. I had given you every reason to make it, and I understood what it said about the marriage I had... Another pause. "About the marriage I had failed to give you." The monitor crackled. Outside, a siren somewhere in the city, fading. "You knew I was in Boston," she said. "Yes." "For 14 months." "Yes." She let that sit for a moment, let it rearrange itself in her understanding of the past year, the phone call she had made, the speed with which he had arrived, the number he had not deleted from his contacts. "And you didn't... You left me alone." "You wanted to be left alone." His jaw moved. I was attempting to respect that. She almost laughed. It wasn't funny. It was something in the neighborhood of tragic. "You were attempting to respect my autonomy while simultaneously maintaining active surveillance on my location. I needed to know you were safe." Tae-hyun. "I needed to know," he said, sharper, the control fraying at one edge. "You were my wife. You were gone. I needed to know." He stopped, pulled the control back together, visibly, the way she had watched him do it 100 times. "I understand that it was a contradiction. I am not asking you to find it rational." She looked at him. At the set of his jaw and the slight tension around his eyes, and the way his hands were flat on his thighs. She had spent 2 years learning this man and 14 months trying to unlearn him, and she was currently sitting across from him in her apartment in Boston, and she could read every single line of him as clearly as a brief. And what she was reading was a man who had spent 14 months alone with a decision he couldn't revoke and a grief he would never describe as grief. "The danger," she said, steering herself back. "Tell me what it actually looks like." "They know I came to Boston. They will determine why, if they haven't already. When they know there is a child—" He paused. "A child is a leverage point. That is how they think. It is not personal. It is operational." "So what do you want to do?" "I want you and Micah to come to New York." He said it without preamble, the way he'd clearly had it prepared since somewhere over the Atlantic. "I have a property there, staffed, secured, outside the city proper. You would continue your legal work. I have legitimate international holdings that require corporate counsel of the level you operate at, and the arrangement would be genuinely professional and compensated accordingly. And Micah would be protected," she said. "Yes." "Inside your walls." "Inside walls that will actually stop what's coming." The edge was there again, brief and honest. "Your 14 floors with one elevator bank will not." She stood up, crossed to the window and looked out at the street below, at the normal mid-morning Boston that she had spent 14 months belonging to. A woman walking a dog, a delivery truck double parked, the public garage across the street where Tae-hyun had already noted the sightlines. She looked at the garage and thought about the word sightlines and felt the city she lived in reorganize itself around a new and unwelcome understanding. "If I do this," she said, without turning around, "it's for Micah. That's the only reason." "I know," he said, "and I work. I'm not—" She stopped. "I'm not staff. I'm not under your authority in my professional capacity. Whatever arrangement we make, documented and independent, your own contract, your own clients, your own decisions, the legitimate corporate work I described would be one account among others. I need that in writing before we go anywhere. I'll have the paperwork drafted today." She turned around. He was looking at her from the couch with that expression she couldn't name. "You had this already prepared." "I had several contingencies prepared." "What were the others?" A pause. "Less cooperative." She looked at him for a long moment. The man who had spent 2 years keeping rooms locked, who had known she was in Boston for 14 months and sat on the information like a man honoring a contract he hadn't written, who had flown 9 hours through the night and positioned himself in a hospital chair and adjusted a blanket on a baby he had never met and said, "I'm not leaving with the finality of something geological." "I have conditions," she said. "Tell me." "Carmen comes with us. She's Micah's babysitter and he trusts her, and I'm not disrupting his routine more than this already will." "Done." "I have final say on anything related to Micah's daily life. Medical, educational, schedule. You can have input. You don't have veto." A pause. Longer this time. "For the immediate period." "Not for the immediate period. As a standing arrangement." His jaw tightened. "We can negotiate the terms as Tae-hyun." She waited until he looked at her. "I raised him alone for 7 months. I made every decision. I know his schedule and his preferences and the exact angle at which you have to hold the bottle, or he refuses to take it in the specific way he needs to be patted on the back before bed. You are his father, and I want him to know you, and I am willing to try to build something here for his sake. But I'm not walking back into a marriage where I have no authority. I'm not doing that again." The silence stretched long enough that she could hear the refrigerator hum from the kitchen. "All right," he said finally. Quiet. Specific. The way he said things that cost him something. "All right," she said. "I'll start packing." She was already moving toward the hallway when he said her name. She stopped. Didn't turn around. "What?" "I'm sorry," he said. "For the rooms I kept locked. I understand. I know it doesn't—" He stopped again, and she could hear in the hesitation all the ways that Kang Tae-hyun was not built for apologies and was attempting one anyway. "I know it doesn't change anything, but I am." She stood in the hallway for a moment. "I know you are," she said, and went to start packing. The move happened the next morning. 2 of Tae-hyun's men went through the apartment first in a way that Imani told herself she was not going to analyze in detail. Carmen arrived with a rolling suitcase and wide eyes and said, "Okay, wow," when she saw the motorcade outside, and then recovered herself with admirable speed and started organizing Micah's things with the systematic efficiency that had made Amani trust her in the first place. Taehyun had spent the night in the apartment's building. Not in the apartment, he had not asked, and she had not offered. He had simply directed one of his people to arrange something in the building, which apparently meant an adjacent vacant unit that the building manager had been persuaded to make available through means Amani chose not to investigate. She found him in the hallway at 7 in the morning, drinking coffee from a paper cup, looking like a man who had slept 4 hours in an empty apartment and found it entirely adequate. He held out a second cup without being asked. She took it. They stood in the hallway for a moment, drinking coffee. "He's awake," she said. "I know, I heard him." A pause. "Do you want to Yes, he said before she'd finished. She let him come in and watched him lift Micah out of the crib with marginally more confidence than the first time. He'd been practicing, she realized, in the limited time over the past 3 days. When she'd handed the baby over, he had been cataloging the information the way he cataloged everything, building competence through methodical attention, and watched Micah grab at the lapel of his suit jacket and pull, and Tae-hyun just let him, standing there in her pale yellow second bedroom in a suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, while a 7-month-old attempted to dismantle his collar. She drank her coffee and watched, and did not examine what she felt. They were 20 minutes from leaving when one of the men from the corridor knocked on the apartment door and said something to Tae-hyun in Korean, low and quick, and Tae-hyun's face went to the other face. Not her husband's face. The other one. He said something back in Korean. 2 words. The man went back into the corridor. "What?" Amani said. Tae-hyun looked at her, then at Micah in the bouncer seat, batting at a plastic ring, then back at her. "We need to move now, not in 20 minutes. Her stomach dropped. "What happened?" "Someone photographed us leaving the hospital 2 days ago." He was already moving, picking up the 2 bags she'd had ready by the door, checking something on his phone. "The photograph has been circulated. It has been identified." He looked at her, and the look said everything the words hadn't. "They know about Micah." She stood very still for exactly 1 second. Then she went and picked up her son. "Carmen," she called, and the steadiness in her voice surprised even her. Carmen appeared from the bedroom doorway. "We're leaving now," Amani said. "Take his bag. Don't forget the formula and the backup pacifier, I know." Carmen already had the bag. She looked at Amani's face and then at Tae-hyun's, and the wide-eyed look was back briefly. And then it was gone, replaced by something that was, Amani thought, actual courage. "Ready." They went out the door. In the elevator, Tae-hyun was on his phone speaking in Korean, and 2 of his men flanked the elevator doors. And Micah looked at the ceiling of the elevator with the openness of a person who has no information about danger and finds elevator ceilings extremely interesting. "Tae-hyun," Amani said quietly, under the phone call. He glanced at her. "How bad?" He held her gaze for a moment. Then he said, still quiet, "The people I told you about. They've confirmed your address." The elevator hit the lobby floor. The doors opened, and one of the men at the front said something sharp in Korean, and the motorcade that had been parked at the curb outside was now moving, and Tae-hyun's hand was at the small of her back, and she was moving before she had made the conscious decision to move. Micah pressed against her chest, and outside through the lobby glass she could see a black car she didn't recognize idling at the corner of her street, engine running, facing her building. And the man in the driver's seat was looking directly at the lobby entrance with the particular stillness of someone who has been waiting. Taehyun's hand pressed harder at the small of her back. Not a push, a direction. She moved left, away from the main lobby doors, toward the service exit that she had used exactly once in 14 months to bring up a piece of furniture. One of his men was already there, holding it open, and the cold morning air hit her face, and Micah stirred against her chest and made a small, uncertain sound that she absorbed with her palm flat against his back. Steady pressure. The signal she had developed over 7 months that meant, I have you, everything is still all right. She did not know if that was still true. The service exit opened onto a narrow alley. 2 of the SUVs had repositioned, She didn't know when, didn't know how they had known to move without being told. And then she understood that they had known because Tae-hyun had told them on that phone call in the elevator, which meant he had been 3 steps ahead of this moment before she had even processed the first step. And she filed that understanding away in the part of her that was still functioning as a lawyer and not as a mother in an alley holding her baby against her chest, while her ex-husband's security detail moved around her like water finding its level. The door of the second SUV was open. She got in. Carmen was beside her in seconds, Micah's bag already in her lap. Tae-hyun came in last, and the door closed, and the vehicle was moving before the latch had fully caught. She looked out the back window. The black car at the corner hadn't moved. It was still there, engine running, facing the lobby entrance of her building, watching the front door, not the alley. They hadn't been seen. She turned back and found Tae-hyun looking at her. They were watching the main entrance, she said. Yes, you knew they would be. I anticipated it was possible. She sat with that for a moment, Micah warm and increasingly restless against her chest. How long have they been watching my building? A pause that was 1 beat too long. I believe since yesterday morning. She stared at him. Yesterday morning? You knew yesterday morning that they had my address and you didn't? I didn't have confirmation until 40 minutes ago, but you suspected. He looked at her steadily. I took precautions. You took precautions. She kept her voice low and flat because Micah was right there and Carmen was right there and the 2 men in the front seat were right there and she was not going to perform her anger for an audience. You took precautions and you let me spend yesterday packing boxes without telling me that someone might have eyes on my building. If I had told you, don't, she cut him off. Don't tell me what I would have done. You don't get to manage my reactions in advance by withholding information. She stopped, breathed. That's the thing that broke us, Tae-hyun. That exact thing. He was quiet. Outside, Boston moved past. The normal city, the morning commuters, the coffee shops opening, the world that had no idea what was moving through it in 3 black SUVs. You're right, he said. She hadn't expected that. It knocked the next sentence out of her. I default to containment, he said. Not an excuse. A fact about himself, stated the way he stated facts, without ornamentation. I manage variables. I understand that it is not the same as honesty. I'm telling you now, from this point, I will tell you what I know when I know it. He paused. Even when I believe you will not like it. She looked at him for a long moment. Starting now, she said. What do you know? He reached into his jacket and removed his phone, pulled up something, handed it to her. A photograph. Grainy, taken from a distance. A telephoto compression that flattened the depth. 2 figures outside a hospital entrance. Her and Tae-hyun, visible clearly enough. And in her arms, partially visible above a hospital blanket, an infant. Where did this come from? She said. It was taken by an independent contractor, not affiliated with my organization or theirs. Someone who sells photographs to interested parties. He took the phone back. It was circulated within the Reyes network approximately 36 hours ago. Reyes, the organization I described, the cartel. He said the word without drama, the way she had heard him say many words that should have had drama in them. Marco Reyes, he controls their East Coast operations. He is the one who received the photograph first. What does he want? What they always want, control of territory, removal of opposition. Tae-hyun put the phone away. And now, potentially, something more specific. Leverage, she said. Yes. She looked at Micah. He had fallen asleep again, his head heavy against her collarbone, his breathing the deep, regular breathing of a child who trusts the arms holding him entirely. She put her chin on the top of his head. So what's the plan? She said. New York, my estate in Westchester. We reassess from there. And Reyes is my problem. He became my problem when he put surveillance on my apartment building. Tae-hyun looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes. Yes, he said. He did. A pause. We'll discuss it in Westchester. Well, the estate was 40 minutes north of the city in a way that felt like a different world. The highway gave way to county roads, and the county roads gave way to a private drive, and the private drive ended at a gate that was either tasteful security or very expensive restraint, depending on how much you knew about what you were looking at. The house beyond it was large and stone and surrounded by mature trees, and was the kind of property that communicated wealth without advertising it, which Amani recognized as the aesthetic of people for whom advertising was either unnecessary or inadvisable. She had never been here. In 2 years of marriage, Taehyun had maintained the Gangnam penthouse as their primary residence, and she had understood that there were properties she hadn't been shown, and she had filed that understanding next to all the other things she had decided not to excavate. Now she stood in the entrance hall of this house and looked at the high ceilings, and the staff, who had clearly been expecting them, and the security infrastructure that was present if you knew what to look for. And she knew what to look for, and she felt the peculiar sensation of walking into a life that had been waiting for her. Carmen appeared beside her and said very quietly, "This is insane." "Yes," Amani agreed. "Like genuinely, this is an insane amount of—" "Carmen, I know. Where's the nursery?" They settled Micah. Carmen took the room adjacent to the nursery without being asked, with the matter-of-fact practicality that Amani had been grateful for since the day she'd hired her. Amani showered in a bathroom that was larger than her apartment bedroom and stood under the water for 4 minutes and did the breathing exercise she had learned from a therapist in her first month in Boston, the one she had seen twice and then stopped seeing because she couldn't afford the time. She had not stopped needing it. She dressed, went downstairs, and found Tae-hyun in what appeared to be a study, standing at a desk with 3 phones and 2 laptops arranged on the surface, and 2 of his men in the room and a third man she hadn't seen before, older, with the compact, watchful quality of someone whose entire professional identity was housed in his peripheral vision. "Give us the room," Tae-hyun said, without looking up. The men went. The older man glanced at Imani once on his way out, not assessment, something more like acknowledgement, and closed the door behind him. "Who is he?" Imani said. "Park Sung-woo. He runs security for the New York operations." Tae-hyun looked up from the desk. He had changed. No suit jacket, sleeves rolled to the elbow, which was the equivalent of dishevelment in Tae-hyun's vocabulary. "He's been with my family's organization for 20 years. "The organization," she said. "I need to understand what I've walked into, specifically, not the version that's designed to make me feel safe." She sat in the chair across from the desk. "All of it." He sat down too. He was quiet for a moment, and she recognized the quality of the quiet. It was the quiet of a man deciding how honest to be. She waited it out. She had always been better at silence than he expected. "The Kang Syndicate has operated since 1987, he said finally. "My grandfather built it. My father expanded it. I inherited it at 26 when my father died." He said it without sentiment, which she had always understood was not the absence of feeling, but the presence of a different kind of discipline. "The legitimate businesses, they are real. The shipping, the real estate, the tech infrastructure, the international holding companies. Every year for the past 7 years, I have shifted more capital into the legitimate side. Every year, the percentage controlled by the other side decreases. But it's not gone." "No, not yet." "How not yet are we talking?" He met her eyes. 3 to 5 years, with the current trajectory." She nodded slowly. "And Reyes, where does he fit?" Reyes represents a cartel that has been expanding northward for approximately 2 years. They want the East Coast distribution networks that my organization controls. They've been attempting to buy access. When that failed, he paused. They became more direct. Define direct. 2 of my operations managers were approached with threats against their families. One accepted the terms, one didn't. His jaw tightened. The one who didn't is no longer alive. The room was very quiet. "And now they know about Micah," Amani said. "Yes." She sat with the full weight of that. The room, the estate, the men outside the door, the gate at the end of the private drive, all of it suddenly not luxurious but necessary, and the distinction was the kind that reorganized a person's understanding of where they were standing and what the ground beneath them was actually made of. "I need to know something," she said. "Ask." "The man who didn't accept their terms, the one who died." She watched his face. Did he have a family? A pause. A wife? 2 sons? Where are they? Safe, relocated, provided for. He said it without breaking her gaze. That is not something I take lightly. She believed him. She believed him because she knew what it cost him to say it. Not the act itself, but the admission of the cost, the acknowledgement that there was a ledger and that people were in it. Taehyun did not speak about those things casually. He never had. All right, she said. All right, he repeated carefully. I'll stay. I'll do the legal work. She stopped. Then, because she had decided somewhere in the hotel bathroom that honesty was the only currency that had any value left. I want to help, not just as legal counsel. I want to understand the full picture. The Reyes threat, the timeline, the exposure points. She met his eyes. I'm a lawyer. I spent 2 years watching you handle things alone that would have gone better with 2 people working them. I'm not asking to run operations. I'm asking to be in the room. He studied her for a long moment. Why? Because my son lives here now, and I don't protect things I don't understand. Something shifted in his expression. The thing she couldn't name again, more visible now that she was seeing it for the 3rd time and beginning to understand that it was not a single thing but a compound one. Respect and something older underneath it. Something that had been there in Singapore and had survived apparently 14 months in an ocean. All right, he said. I'll brief you fully. Tomorrow. Tonight. He almost smiled. Tonight, he conceded. The briefing lasted 3 hours. Maps, organizational charts, financial structures, the Reyes Network's known personnel, their methodology, their current position. Taehyun laid it out with the same clinical precision she had seen him apply to legitimate business strategy, and she listened the way she had always listened, completely, without interrupting except to ask precise questions, building the architecture of understanding in her mind the way she built a legal argument, from evidence outward. At the end of it, she sat back and was quiet for a moment. The FBI Organized Crime Task Force, she said. The one tracking Reyes, you know about them. He looked at her. I know they exist. They've been building a case for 2 years. If they had solid intelligence on the Reyes Network's East Coast operations, specific, actionable intelligence, they could dismantle it before it comes for you. She paused. Before it comes for Micah. Yes, he said carefully. That's accurate. But you can't give them that intelligence, because it would expose your own network. There are significant complications. She looked at the map spread on the desk between them. The Reyes network, the distribution points, the names she had spent 3 hours memorizing. What if someone else gave it to them? He looked at her for a long moment. What are you saying? I'm saying that I am a licensed attorney with a clean record and no criminal associations on paper. She met his eyes. I'm saying I could make a contact, carefully. Pass specific intelligence about Reyes, nothing about your organization, nothing that touches Kang International, and give the FBI exactly what they need to go after the threat without knowing where the information came from. The silence was very specific. Imani. His voice had gone to something careful and low. Do you understand what you're describing? I'm describing protecting our son. You're describing operating as an intelligence asset. I'm describing doing what I do. Finding the legal and strategic pressure point that ends the threat with the least collateral damage. She leaned forward slightly. I'm good at this, Taehyun. This is exactly what I'm good at. He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that she could hear the house settling around them, the distant sound of a door somewhere, the wind outside against the windows. I would need to know every contact, he said finally, every meeting, every communication. Nothing is passed without my review. She had expected this. Agreed. With one exception. There are no exceptions. The terms of any arrangement I make with federal agents is sealed. You don't get to know the specifics of what I agree to, because if you do, you're exposed. That's not protection for me. That's protection for you. He stared at her. It's also, she said, the right answer legally. You know it is. Another long silence. His hands were flat on the desk. She could see the exact line where his control was working. You came in here, he said very quietly, 30 minutes after a full briefing on one of the most dangerous criminal organizations on the East Coast. And your response was to immediately identify the one strategy that puts you directly in the line of contact with federal law enforcement while I have no oversight of the arrangement. Yes. That is either very brave or extremely reckless. Coming from you, she said, I'll take that as a compliment. Something moved across his face. It was brief, and he killed it, but she saw it. We'll discuss the parameters, he said. We will, she agreed. Point. She made her first contact with the FBI task force 9 days later. His name was Special Agent Derek Okafor, and he met her in a coffee shop in Midtown Manhattan with the careful nondescriptness of a federal agent who had learned that the quality of looking unremarkable was its own skill. He was 40-something, compact, with the watchful stillness of someone who spent his professional life listening to what people said and what they didn't. She had chosen the meeting point. She had told no one the specific location except that she was meeting a contact. She had driven herself, which had required a negotiation with Tae-hyun that she had won on the grounds that a car registered to his security detail outside a federal meeting was not ideal tradecraft. Okafor looked at her across the table for a moment after she'd introduced herself. Ms. Brooks, he said, what exactly is it you think you have for us? Intelligence on the Reyes cartel's East Coast infrastructure, she said. Distribution points, personnel, communication protocols, financial routing, and the location of 2 operational facilities in New Jersey that your task force does not currently have flagged. He was very still. And how would you come to have that information? I'm a corporate attorney with clients in international logistics, she said. I see a great deal of documentation. Some of it is more interesting than other parts. She met his eyes. I'm not going to answer further questions about sourcing. What I will tell you is that my information is accurate, it is current, and I have a personal interest in the Reyes organization being neutralized. Personal interest. I have a child, she said. That's sufficient explanation. Okafor looked at her for a long moment. You understand that if we develop this into an active relationship, there are legal implications for... I'm a Harvard-trained attorney, she said. I've already mapped the implications. I'm here voluntarily, I am not requesting immunity, and I'm not providing information on any organization except the Reyes cartel. She put a small USB drive on the table, her fingers resting on it. The first package is on here. Verify it. When you've confirmed it's accurate, we can discuss terms for an ongoing arrangement. He looked at the drive, looked at her. You did this by yourself. I did. No one sent you. She met his eyes and said the thing that was technically true from every angle she had constructed it. No one sent me. I'm here because I made this decision independently. He picked up the drive. 1. She drove back to Westchester with the particular clarity that comes after committing to something irreversible. The meeting was done. The drive was in Okafor's hands. The thing she had set in motion was in motion. She was in the driveway when her phone showed a text from a number she didn't recognize. Not Okafor. She had his contact protocol. This was something else. A Boston area code. The text said, "We know where you live now. We know about the boy. Tell Kang to step aside or the next photograph we take will be the last one." She sat in the car for 30 seconds. Then she went inside and found Tae-hyun and handed him the phone without a word. He read it. His face did nothing visible. He handed the phone back. "The contact," he said. "Did you make it?" She looked at him. "Yes." "Good." He looked at the phone in her hand, at the text on the screen. Then he looked at her. "Then we've both committed to paths we cannot walk back from." She understood what he was saying. He knew she had made contact. Not the details, but the fact. And he had let her. And now they were both standing at the same point of no return, from different directions, with the same thing between them worth protecting. "Tae-hyun," she said. "Yes." "If this goes wrong, it won't. But if it does..." She held his gaze. "Micah goes to my sister in London. Adeas. It's already in my will. I need to know you won't. It won't come to that." His voice was flat and certain in the way that she had come to understand was not arrogance, but something more structural. The voice of a man who has decided that a particular outcome is simply not acceptable and has organized his entire capacity around preventing it. "Promise me anyway," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. If the worst happens, he said, with the precision of a man choosing every word, Micah goes to your sister. You have my word. She nodded. She believed him. She had always been able to tell. She was handing him back the phone when the security alarm inside the house began to scream. Not the perimeter alarm, something interior, closer, the motion sensor on the east wing corridor, and the sound had barely registered before Park Sung-woo was through the study door with his hand inside his jacket, and two men were moving down the hallway, and Tae-hyun was already on his feet with the specific economy of a man whose body had been trained to respond before his mind finished processing. Carmen, Imani said. She was already moving. North stairwell, Tae-hyun said, and she understood. The nursery was north wing, second floor, and she was at the stairwell door before the echo of his voice had cleared the room, taking the stairs two at a time with her hand on the rail and her heart doing something violent against her sternum. The alarm cut off. Sudden silence, which was worse. She hit the second floor and turned the corner, and Carmen was already in the nursery doorway with Micah against her chest, both arms around him, her face white, but her feet planted. Something tripped outside the window, Carmen said. Her voice was steady. I heard it, and I grabbed him. Good. Imani took Micah. He was awake, disoriented, his face doing the pre-cry compression that meant he had 5 seconds before he decided the world was ending. She put her mouth against his ear. Hey, Bug, I've got you. He subsided by degrees, his hand fisting in the fabric of her shirt. Park appeared at the end of the hallway. Motion sensor malfunction, east side exterior, no breach confirmed. He looked at Imani. We're checking the perimeter now. How long until confirmed clear? 10 minutes. She stood in the nursery doorway with her son, and her heartbeat slowly dropping out of its emergency register, and thought about the text on her phone and the USB drive in Okafor's hands and the organizational chart she had memorized over 3 hours the night before, and understood, with the cold clarity that she usually reserved for reading an adversary's legal brief. The 10 minutes of maybe was going to define the texture of every day in this house until something was finished. She was done waiting for things to finish themselves. The perimeter was clear. Motion sensor malfunction confirmed. An animal, a deer, or something larger, triggering the east exterior. Park delivered the assessment with the professional neutrality of a man who would not permit himself to appear relieved. Tae-hyun sat at the desk afterward and looked at the map for a long time. Then he made 3 calls in Korean. Fast, clipped, the tone she recognized as the one that generated immediate action rather than conversation. When he was done, he looked up and found her in the doorway. Sit down, she said. Imani, sit down, Tae-hyun. I have something to say and I need you to hear it before you make whatever decision you just called 3 people about. He sat, barely. The edge of the chair, his weight forward, the posture of a man in motion who has temporarily agreed to pause. Reyes sent that text to provoke you, she said. He wants you reactive. He wants you to move on him before you're ready, before the FBI has anything actionable, so that whatever you do gives him justification and you're exposed. She watched his face. He's done this before. It's in the documentation I gave Okafor. He used the same method with the Salazar group in Miami. He threatened a family member. They moved on him too fast, and he was ready. Tae-hyun looked at her steadily. I know. Then you know that walking into whatever you just called those 3 people about is exactly what he wants. What he wants, Tae-hyun said, is irrelevant. What matters is that he has your address. He has your name. He knows about Micah. His jaw tightened. That does not wait for the FBI's timeline. I'm not asking you to wait forever. I'm asking you to wait 3 weeks. She leaned forward. Okafor confirmed this morning that the package I gave him checks out. He's escalating within the task force. 3 weeks gets us federal action on the New Jersey facilities, which decapitates the East Coast operation. 3 weeks. 3 weeks is a long time when someone has your address. We're in Westchester, behind a gate, and 12 of your people. We're fine for 3 weeks. You don't know that. Neither do you. But I know that reactive is exactly where he wants you, and you are smarter than reactive, and you know it. She held his gaze. 3 weeks. He was quiet. She could hear the calculation happening behind his stillness, the risk assessment, the variables, the contingencies stacking against each other. She had watched him do this 100 times across 100 decisions, and she knew the moment it resolved which was a slight loosening around the eyes, almost invisible. 2 weeks, he said, and I want daily updates from your federal contact. I can't give you, not the content, confirmation that the process is active, yes or no. He looked at her. That's the line, Imani. I can hold at that line. She considered it. Yes or no, she confirmed. That's all. He nodded once. The 2 weeks were the specific tension of a coiled thing. The estate operated in a state of heightened readiness that was invisible to Micah and Carmen and visible to everyone else. The slightly altered positions of the men on the grounds, the additional vehicle at the gate, the way every meal was delivered to the house rather than requiring anyone to leave. Tae-hyun worked. He always worked. He was on calls at midnight and up before dawn, and she would sometimes find him at the kitchen table at 6 a.m. with coffee and a laptop, and once she found him there with Micah instead. Micah propped against his forearm eating pureed sweet potato with the serious concentration of someone conducting research, and Tae-hyun was watching him with the expression she had finally named. It was the expression of a man who had decided something was worth the cost, finally and completely, after a long time of being uncertain. She had turned around and gone back upstairs before he saw her. Ipob. On the 10th day, Okafor called. The facilities in Newark checked out, he said. We moved on them this morning. Clean operation, no casualties, 17 arrests, and enough documentation to build a RICO case that goes 3 levels up the Reyes hierarchy. A pause. Your intelligence was exact, Ms. Brooks. I mean that. I've been doing this for 12 years, and that package was the most precisely organized threat mapping I have ever received from a civilian source. I'm a lawyer, she said. Organization is the job. Right. Another pause. There's something else. We found communication records in the Newark facility, operational planning documents. His voice changed slightly, the shift of someone navigating toward something careful. Ms. Brooks, the Reyes organization has been planning a direct action. Not surveillance, not threat messaging, an actual operation. Her hand tightened on the phone. When? The planning suggests within the next 10 days. The target is... He stopped. I think you already know the target. Tell me anyway. They've identified Kang Tae-hyun as their primary obstacle to East Coast expansion. The documents indicate a planned approach under the cover of a peace negotiation. False flag. They reach out through intermediaries, suggesting they want to discuss territorial terms. He agrees to a meeting, and the meeting is the operation. She stood very still. Outside the window of the room she was in, afternoon light was moving through the trees at the edge of the property. Beautiful, indifferent, entirely unconcerned. Have they made contact yet, she said, through the intermediaries? Based on the communication timeline in the documents, Okafor paused. We believe the contact was made yesterday. She closed her eyes for 2 seconds. Ms. Brooks, I need to go, she said. I'll contact you within the hour. She ended the call and stood there for a moment with the phone in her hand and the afternoon light moving through the trees and the sound of Micah somewhere upstairs making his enormous laugh about something, that disproportionate laugh, the one she could find even in a crowded room. Then she went to find Tae-hyun. He was in the study. He was on the phone. He looked up when she came in and read her face immediately. She saw it happen, the way his eyes went sharp, and said something short into the phone and ended the call. They contacted you, she said. Yesterday, through intermediaries, suggesting a peace negotiation. He was very still. How do you know that? Because the FBI found planning documents in the Newark facility they raided this morning. She watched his face. The negotiation is the operation, Tae-hyun. They have no intention of negotiating. It's an ambush. He looked at her for a long time. His face was the other face, closed and specific and working. You knew, she said. Something cold moved through her. You already knew it was false. You were going to go anyway. I know how to... You were going to walk into an ambush. Her voice came out low and shook slightly on the last word, which she did not forgive herself for. When? 3 days. And you were going to tell me when. He held her gaze. After. The word landed like something dropped from a height. After. After the ambush, after the violence, after whatever he had planned to do that he had apparently decided she did not need to know about in advance. After, as though she were staff, as though she were the woman in the Gangnam penthouse who had not been permitted in certain rooms. "I told you," she said. "I told you in this room that the thing that broke us was withholding. I told you that was the line." "This is not the same." "It is exactly the same." She crossed the room and stopped 3 feet from the desk and looked at him directly. "You made a unilateral decision about something that affects Micah's entire life without telling me, without consulting me, because you decided in advance what my reaction would be and managed around it." She stopped, breathed. "When were you going to tell me you'd accepted the meeting?" A pause. "I hadn't accepted it yet." "But you were going to." He met her eyes and said nothing, which was its own answer. She turned and walked to the window, pressed her hand flat against the cold glass. Outside, 2 of his men were doing a perimeter pass, visible briefly through the trees and then gone. She stared at the space where they had been. "I'm telling Okafor," she said. "The meeting location, the date. I'm going to give the FBI enough to move on it. If federal agents appear at that meeting, the ambush becomes a federal operation, and Reyes's people go to prison instead of into a firefight with yours." She turned. "Nobody dies, Taehyun. That's the point. My people are prepared. Your people are prepared to fight. They might win, and some of them will die, and Reyes will have backup you don't know about. And even if you walk out of there, the organization is exposed, and the FBI starts asking questions about who won a gunfight on American soil against a cartel and..." She stopped. "I have spent 10 days building a relationship with an FBI agent who trusts me and is willing to work with the intelligence I provide without asking where it comes from. I have done that for exactly this moment." She crossed back to the desk. "Let me finish what I started." He looked at her. The study was very quiet. Somewhere in the house, Micah's laugh came through the ceiling. Muffled, enormous, real. "If you tell them," Taehyun said slowly, "they'll know you have access to Reyes's operational planning. They'll push on sourcing. I can manage Okafor. And when they trace it back, I'm a lawyer. I know how to construct a source trail that holds." She held his gaze. "Trust me, the way I have been trusting you for the past 2 weeks." The weight of that settled between them. He breathed out once. "When's the contact meeting?" "I'll arrange it today. The operation moves before yours." He was quiet for a long moment. She watched him work through it. Not the pride. She had never believed his hesitation was about pride. It was about control. About the deep-grained refusal to allow variables he couldn't manage. The same trait that had kept rooms locked and kept him alive and kept her at arm's length for 2 years. She watched him work through it, and she waited. "All right," he said. She was already on her phone to Okafor. The meeting location was a private industrial facility in the Bronx, confirmed through the document seized in Newark. Okafor had it within 2 hours of Imani's call. The task force moved fast. She could hear it in his voice. The compressed energy of a man watching a 2-year case converge into something operational. "We'll have a perimeter established 6 hours before the meeting," he said. "Plainclothes, nothing visible from outside. When Reyes's people move into position, we move. And if Kang's people are also there," she said carefully. A pause. "Our focus is the Reyes organization, Ms. Brooks. Anyone else present who isn't an active combatant walks." She understood what he was not saying and what he was saying and the gap between them. "Understood." She told Taehyun after the call. Not the specifics, not the positioning, not the federal timeline. Just, it's set. It moves the day after tomorrow. The meeting happens at noon. The FBI is already there before anyone arrives. He listened. He was standing at the window of the study where she had stood 40 minutes earlier, and he was looking out at the same trees and the same late light. "It'll work," she said. "Yes." He turned. "I want to walk through the facility first, alone. My own read of the space before it becomes an operation." She stared at him. "Taehyun. Not to fight, to understand." His voice was flat and specific. "I need to know what I'm sending my people into, even as backup. I need to walk the space. If Reyes has eyes on the location and they see you, they see me. The beating happens early and on my terms rather than theirs. He looked at her calmly. That is not the worst outcome. She stared at him and understood with a clarity that was almost physical that this was the one variable she could not manage. This was Tae-hyun at the most fundamental level. The man who walked into rooms he already knew were dangerous because not walking in was not a category his mind accepted. She had known this about him in Singapore, and she had known it in Gangnam, and she was standing in Westchester knowing it now with the same helpless recognition of someone watching a law of physics operate. I'm going with you, she said. No. Yes. She met his eyes. Don't manage around me. Not this. Not now. He looked at her for a long time. The afternoon light was going. The study was getting darker, and neither of them moved to turn on a lamp. You stay in the vehicle, he said. You do not get out for any reason. Agreed. If anything moves wrong, the driver takes you back here immediately. No argument. Agreed. He held her gaze for another moment. Then he nodded once, the way he nodded when something was settled. They went the next morning. Before dawn, the city still in its pre-gray darkness. Amani in the back of the SUV with the specific stillness of someone who has made their decision and is past second-guessing it. Tae-hyun beside her, dark jacket, nothing extraneous, the version of him that was the most distilled. The facility was in an industrial pocket of the Bronx, surrounded by warehouses and access roads and the kind of geography that existed specifically to be unremarkable. The driver circled the block once. Tae-hyun looked at everything. Amani looked at what he looked at and tried to see it the way he saw it. Sightlines, entry points, the distances between structures, the places where a person could be and not be visible. There, he said quietly, to the man in the front passenger seat. A loading bay on the south face. The man noted it. They circled again. On the second pass, Tae-hyun went very still. Stop, he said. The driver stopped. Tae-hyun was looking at a vehicle parked across from the facility's main entrance. It was unremarkable, panel van, no markings, but something about it had caught him. He looked at it for a long moment. That's not Reyes, he said. Amani looked at the van. What do you mean? The positioning, the angle. He was quiet, his eyes moving over it with the systematic attention she recognized. That van has been positioned to watch the entrance without being obvious. It's early. He turned and looked at her. Amani, the FBI is already here. The inside of the vehicle went very quiet. She felt the blood leave her face in a single cold wave. They're not supposed to be here until tomorrow, she said. Her voice came out even, which was a kind of miracle. The operation is tomorrow. The meeting is tomorrow. Someone moved up the timeline. He was looking at her, not with accusation, something more precise than that. He was looking at her the way he looked at a document he was reading for the second time, finding the thing he'd missed the first pass. Or someone changed the information they were given. She sat very still. Tae-hyun, did you tell them about the preliminary walkthrough? His voice was very quiet and very controlled. Did Okafor know we were coming here today? She looked at him. She had not told Okafor about the walkthrough. She had not told him she would be here today. She had given him the location and the time of the meeting and nothing else, which meant either Okafor had moved independently or someone else had given the FBI a reason to be here early. I didn't tell him, she said. He held her gaze. Tae-hyun, I didn't tell him about today. He looked at her for a moment longer, then he looked back at the van. His jaw moved. Someone did, he said, and they knew we would be here. The silence in the vehicle was absolute. She was running it. Who knew about the walkthrough? She had told no one except Tae-hyun. Tae-hyun had told the driver in Park. Park had been with the organization for 20 years, and Tae-hyun trusted him with the unquestioning trust of someone who has never had reason not to. 20 years. The thought arrived without drama, without announcement, in the way the most dangerous thoughts always arrived, quietly, taking up space before you noticed it was there. She looked at Tae-hyun. His face had gone absolutely still. He had arrived at the same place. Call Park, she said. He's at the estate. Call him, now. and ask him specifically where he is in the house. Taehyun pulled out his phone. Called. It rang 4 times. 5. He looked at the screen. Called again. It rang through to voicemail. Park Sung-woo, who had been with the Kang organization for 20 years and who answered his phone within 2 rings at any hour of the day or night, did not pick up. Taehyun lowered the phone. His face was the other face, completely the other face. Micah, Amani said, and the word came out broken at the edges because her body had understood before she finished saying it what it meant that Park wasn't answering, what it meant that the FBI was already here, what it meant that someone had fed the timing of a private walkthrough to federal agents, while the one person who knew the schedule wasn't picking up his phone. Go, Taehyun said to the driver. The word came out with a force that was not volume. It was compression, the entire weight of a man's will packed into a single syllable. The SUV was moving before the echo cleared. Amani had her phone out. Carmen. 3 rings, 4. And then Carmen's voice, slightly breathless, slightly confused, the way she sounded when she'd been moving fast. Ms. Imani, hi, I was just... Where are you right now? Exactly. I'm in the nursery. Micah just woke up. I was getting his... Lock the nursery door, right now. Don't open it for anyone except me or Taehyun. Not Park, not any of the security staff, no one. A pause. Short, decisive. Carmen was 19 and practical, and in this moment, Amani was profoundly grateful for both. Okay, locking it now. The sound of a bolt sliding. It's locked. What's happening? We're 20 minutes out. Don't move. Don't open that door. She ended the call and looked at Taehyun. He was on his own phone, speaking Korean in the clipped operational tone, calling every channel except Park. His face was closed down completely. Not blank, not calm, but the face of a man who has identified the threat and collapsed all processing into a single function. She looked out the window at the highway unspooling ahead of them and did what she always did when the world was moving too fast. She built the architecture, what she knew, what it meant, what the next decision had to be. Park had been with the organization 20 years. He had positioned himself at the estate. He had known about the walkthrough because Taehyun had told him. He had gone silent at the exact moment the FBI appeared at a location they shouldn't have known about yet, and someone at the estate was not answering calls. 20 years was a long time to wait, or a long time to be waiting for something. She looked at Taehyun. The men at the estate, how many are loyal to Park specifically, as opposed to you? He looked at her. The question landed, and she watched him absorb it, watched him run it backward through 20 years of operational history with the speed of a man who had always known this was a possible arithmetic and had chosen to believe it wasn't. 2, he said finally. Possibly 3. And the others? Mine. So when we arrive, the others will handle it. He held her gaze. Park will not hurt the child. Whatever he is, whatever he has become, he has known me since I was a boy. He will not touch Micah. She heard the certainty in it. She also heard what was underneath the certainty, which was not confidence but need. The need of a man who has just discovered that one of the foundational structures of his life has been built on something that was not what he believed. She didn't argue with it. Some things you let a person hold until they can put them down themselves. The SUV accelerated. She watched the speedometer from the corner of her eye and didn't say anything about that either. They came through the gate at speed. 2 of Taehyun's men were already in the drive, which meant the word had reached ahead of them, and the estate had organized itself around a new reality in the 20 minutes since the phone calls. She registered this automatically. The positions, the faces she recognized, the absence of the 2 men she had started to categorize as Parks. Taehyun was out of the vehicle before it fully stopped. She was 2 steps behind him. North Wing, one of the men said to Taehyun in Korean, and Taehyun moved without breaking stride. She moved with him. He didn't tell her to stay back, and she didn't ask for permission, and neither of them acknowledged the implicit negotiation of those facts. They took the north stairwell, and on the second-floor landing, there were sounds. A voice, Korean, low and controlled, coming from the direction of the nursery. Park's voice. Taehyun stopped. She stopped beside him. Park was standing outside the nursery door. He was alone. His hands were visible, nothing in them, and he was speaking through the door in Korean with a tone that was, she parsed it carefully, not threatening, reasoning. The voice of a man trying to talk someone into something. Carmen, to her enormous credit, was not responding. Park heard them at the end of the hallway. He turned. He looked exactly as he always looked, compact, watchful, the face that gave nothing. Except that it was giving something now, something she didn't have a Korean cultural frame for entirely, but recognized anyway. The look of a man who has been caught mid-step in a direction he cannot explain and knows it. Sung Woo, Tae-hyun said. Just the name, nothing else. Park looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Imani, then back at Tae-hyun. How long? Tae-hyun said. A pause. 8 months. 8 months. The Reyes network had identified him 8 months ago, which meant approximately 2 months before Imani had made the phone call from the Boston hospital, which meant Park had known about Micah from almost the moment Tae-hyun had. They approached you, Tae-hyun said. They had my daughter, Park said. His voice was flat. Not defensive, emptied out, the voice of someone who made a decision that cost them everything and has been living inside the cost ever since. In Seoul. They had her for 3 days before I knew. By the time I found her, he stopped. The terms were set. The hallway was very quiet. Imani looked at Tae-hyun's face and saw what 20 years of loyalty looked like when it arrived at its actual price. Your daughter is safe, Tae-hyun said. She is because I know what you did. Tae-hyun's voice was still flat, still controlled. I'm telling you she is safe now. I have people with her in Seoul as of 40 minutes ago. Park blinked. Something moved through his face. A crack in the emptied-out surface, something rawer underneath. When did I ever not protect the people who belong to this organization? Tae-hyun held his gaze, including their families. The crack widened. Park looked at the floor. His hands, she noticed, were not entirely steady. The walkthrough, she said, because she needed to understand the full shape of it. You told someone we were coming this morning. Park looked at her. I told them you were coming, not him. He looked back at Tae-hyun. They wanted to use the early arrival as a trigger, have the FBI take both of you, create chaos, clear the field. I told them it was only you going. A pause. I was trying to limit the damage, Tae-hyun said. Yes, while still feeding them enough to keep your daughter safe. Yes. The word came out wrecked. Tae-hyun was quiet for a moment. She watched him stand in that hallway and carry the weight of 20 years of a relationship being what it was and also what it had become. And she understood that these two things were not mutually exclusive, and that this was one of the truths about loyalty and betrayal that people preferred to pretend didn't exist, that they could both be real, simultaneously, in the same person. Step away from the door, Tae-hyun said. Park stepped away. Tae-hyun knocked on the nursery door. 3 times, specific rhythm. Carmen, it's Tae-hyun, Imani is here. A pause. Then the bolt slid back. Carmen opened the door with Micah on her hip, her face doing the thing it had been doing for the past 20 minutes, which was controlled terror wearing the mask of composure, and when she saw Imani, she breathed out with a fullness that filled the hallway. Imani took Micah, pressed her face against the top of his head. He smelled like formula and baby shampoo and the specific warmth of a child who has been held close, and she stood in the nursery doorway and held him and let the shaking happen in her hands where he couldn't feel it. 2 of Tae-hyun's men took Park downstairs. Not violently. There was no need for violence. Park had stopped being a threat the moment he was seen. She understood from the way it was handled, from the specific manner in which the men moved and the words they used, that what happened to Park next would be decided by Tae-hyun alone and would not be decided in this hallway. She didn't ask about it then. Later, hours later, after Micah had been fed and put down for a nap, in a room that now had 2 of Tae-hyun's most trusted men outside the door. After Carmen had been given a glass of wine she had entirely earned, and a long explanation that covered approximately a third of what had actually happened. She found Tae-hyun in the study. He was sitting, not at the desk, not in the working position, just in the chair, the room dark except for the window light, and he was looking at his hands. She sat across from him. She didn't turn on a lamp. "What happens to Park?" she said. "He's going to his daughter." He looked up. "Seoul, both of them. There's a place outside the city. My grandfather's property in the countryside. They'll be safe there." He paused. "And done. With all of it." She looked at him. "You're not—" "He fed 8 months of intelligence to people trying to kill me," Tae-hyun said. "And he stood outside that door instead of breaking it down." He held her gaze. "I'm not naive about what he did. I'm also not—" He stopped. "He's known me since I was 12 years old. He taught me how to read a room." A pause. "I'll carry the cost of what he did. I won't add to it." She sat with that for a moment. "The FBI," she said. "Okafor called while we were driving back. The operation is still moving. Tomorrow." The meeting proceeds as planned. Reyes's people move into the facility. The task force takes them. She paused. "Without the walkthrough triggering early, the timeline holds." "Without Park feeding them the early arrival," Tae-hyun said. "Yes." He was quiet. "So it works. If Reyes doesn't change the plan in the next 18 hours. She met his eyes. "He won't. He thinks he still has the advantage. He thinks the ambush is intact." Tae-hyun nodded slowly. He looked back at his hands. She looked at the window. Outside, the property was settling into late afternoon, the security patterns moving in their deliberate way through the grounds, and everything was still the same and completely different. "I need to tell you something," she said. He looked at her. "About the FBI arrangement. About Okafor." She held his gaze. "He asked me in our last meeting about the source of the intelligence. He's professional. He's not going to push in ways that burn the relationship, but he's not naive either." She paused. "He knows the intelligence came from inside an organization with direct conflict with Reyes. He's not asking because I've given him enough to work with, and he understands the value of not asking." Another pause. "But that has an expiration date. After tomorrow, after the operation concludes, there will be a period where the task force reviews everything and maps the sources. It won't take them long. Books. How long? Months, maybe less." She was steady. "I need you to understand that. What I've been doing, it's protected us through this. And it ends, Reyes, but the protection it gives us from federal scrutiny is temporary. You need to accelerate the transition, the legitimate side. The timeline you gave me, 3 to 5 years, it needs to compress." He looked at her for a long moment. "How compressed?" 18 months. 2 years at the outside." She held his gaze. "I can help with the legal architecture, the restructuring. I know how to build a corporation that passes federal scrutiny because I know how the scrutiny works." She paused. "But you have to commit to it, fully. Not as a strategy, not as a long game, as the actual decision." The room was quiet. She could hear her own heartbeat in the silence, which was something she had not noticed in a long time. Usually the world was too loud. "I committed to it before you arrived," he said. "That was always the direction." "I know. I'm asking you to commit to the timeline." He looked at her steadily. 18 months. "Yes," he breathed out. "All right." "I need it in writing." Something moved across his face that was almost a smile. "You always need it in writing." "I'm a lawyer, Tae-hyun. That's not going to change." "No," he said. "It's not." And the way he said it was not a complaint. But the FBI operation the next day lasted 4 hours. Amani knew this because Okafor called her when it was finished, while she was sitting in the kitchen feeding Micah and pretending to read a brief that she had read the same paragraph of 17 times. The call was short and professional and contained a number, 23 arrests, and a confirmation that Marco Reyes was among them. "East Coast operation is finished," Okafor said. "Took the whole leadership tier in one move. With the RICO documentation from Newark, the federal case is airtight." A pause. "This is a significant result, Ms. Brooks. I want you to know that." "I know," she said. "Going forward," he stopped. "I think we both understand that the nature of this arrangement has served its purpose." "Yes," she said. "I think we do." Another pause. Professional, measured. "If your circumstances change and you find you have additional information relevant to ongoing federal investigations." You'll be the first call, she said. But I think my circumstances are going to change in ways that make that unlikely. A beat. I think that's probably wise. His voice was dry but not unkind. Take care of that kid. She looked at Micah, who was examining a piece of banana with the focused suspicion of a scientist encountering ambiguous data. That's the plan, she said. Taehyun came home from the meeting at which he had not been present. He had been 3 miles away in a vehicle when the operation moved, which had been the compromise, which had been the version of events where he was close enough to respond and far enough to not be there. And he walked into the kitchen and looked at the two of them and stood in the doorway for a moment. She looked up. It's done, she said. He looked at Micah. Micah looked at him. Then Micah held out the piece of banana with the openness of a child who has not yet learned that offers can be refused. Taehyun sat down at the kitchen table, took the banana. Micah looked enormously pleased with himself. Park is gone, Taehyun said quietly, not about the banana. He and his daughter left Seoul this morning. The property is theirs. No one will find them. She nodded. And Reyes? Federal custody. Okafor confirmed. The whole East Coast leadership. He was quiet. She watched him hold the piece of banana and look at his son and do the thing she had come to understand was him processing the full weight of a chapter closing. Not quickly, not with drama, but with the thorough attention he gave to everything. I owe you a conversation, he said finally. You owe me several. Yes. He set the banana down on the table and looked at her directly. I kept you out of rooms for 2 years. I made decisions I told myself were protective and that were, in fact, controlling. I understand the difference now, in a way I didn't then. His voice was measured, each word carrying its full weight. I'm not asking you to absorb that as an apology and move forward. I'm telling you I understand it because I need you to know that I understand it before anything else happens between us. She looked at him for a long moment. What do you think happens next? She said. Between us. He held her gaze. I think you are the most precise person I have ever known. I think you left because I gave you no other rational choice. I think you came back because Micah needed me. And I think you have stayed because... He stopped. I hope it is because there is something here worth staying for. Not the estate. Not the legal work. Not the security. His jaw moved. Me. Whatever version of me you can still find acceptable. The kitchen was very quiet. Micah had found another piece of banana and was conducting further research. The guitar, she said. He looked at her. You play at midnight, when you think no one is awake. She met his eyes. I've heard you twice since we got here. That version of you, the one who plays guitar on the floor when no one is watching, that's the version I stayed for, in Seoul. That was the room you never locked. She paused. I need all the rooms to be that room. I need you to understand that's not negotiable. I know, he said. Not surrender. Agreement. And I work. My clients, my contract, my decisions. Yes. And we do this slowly. Whatever this is. It doesn't get declared or formalized until it's real. Until we've built something that can hold weight. He nodded once. Slowly, he said, and it sounded, coming from him, like a commitment. She looked at him across the kitchen table, this man who had been a locked room and a midnight guitar, and a presence she had spent 14 months trying to unlive. This man who had flown 9 hours through the night for a child he hadn't known existed and had stood in a PICU doorway with his hand on the doorframe for 9 counted seconds and then walked in anyway. Micah reached across the table and put his hand on top of Taehyun's. The small fingers barely covered 2 of his. Taehyun looked down at his son's hand. Something moved through his face. The compound expression she had finally named. The one that was not a single thing. It was the look of a man who has spent his entire adult life building walls and has discovered, late and at enormous cost, that the thing he was trying to protect was never going to be safe inside them. That it was only safe out here, in this kitchen, in this ordinary daylight, in the reach of a 7-month-old who did not know yet that the world contained things worth being afraid of. She watched him turn his hand over and close his fingers gently around Micah's. She did not look away. The legal restructuring took 19 months. She built it from the ground up. The architecture of a legitimate international corporation that could withstand federal scrutiny from any angle. that had the kind of documented history and clean capital trails and compliant governance structures that said, this is what this always was. She worked 12-hour days and fought Tae-hyun's impulse toward opacity at every turn and won most of the arguments because she was right, and he was learning to accept being wrong with something approaching grace. The day the restructuring was complete, the day the last legacy entity was dissolved and Kang International stood as a legitimate multinational with a board that included 2 independent directors and a general counsel who was also, technically, the chief legal officer, Tae-hyun put a document on her desk. She looked at it. It was a contract. Her contract. New terms, new compensation structure, her name on the masthead as chief legal officer of Kang International, with a clause that specified in language she recognized because she had written it that her professional decisions required no approval from the principal shareholder. I already have a contract, she said. This one is better. She looked at it for a moment, then she looked at him. You know I'm going to redline this. I expect nothing less. She picked up a pen. He sat across from her and waited. Outside the office window, the Westchester property was green and deep in late summer, and somewhere in the house she could hear Micah, not crying, not distressed, just making noise, the particular running commentary of a 14-month-old discovering the acoustic properties of various surfaces. She redlined 3 clauses. He accepted 2 without argument and negotiated the third for 4 minutes before she accepted his counterproposal because it was, she had to admit, the better construction. She signed it. He took it from her and looked at her signature and was quiet for a moment. There's something else, he said. She looked up. He reached into the desk drawer, put something else on the desk between them. Small, flat, contained in a black leather case that she recognized from the photograph he had placed on Micah's crib rail in the Boston PICU, the photograph she had never been able to see from her angle. She looked at it for a moment. What is it? She said. Open it. She opened the case. Inside was a ring, not large, not conspicuous, the antithesis of display. Korean gold, she thought, darker than American yellow gold, with a single stone that was not a diamond but something darker and deeper, and engraved on the interior band, in characters she had learned enough of to read, the word for home. She looked at it for a long time. This is not a proposal, Tae-hyun said. I know we said slowly. I know it has to be real before it's formal. He held her gaze. This is a reminder that what we are building has a direction. He paused. When you're ready, if you're ready, it's there. She closed the case. He nodded once, accepting it. She stood up and she walked around the desk, and she stood in front of him and she looked at him, at the man who had been a locked room and an ocean crossing and a hand adjusted on a hospital crib rail, who had held a piece of banana with the gravity of a man receiving a gift he hadn't known he was waiting for. She leaned down and put her mouth against his temple, held it there for a moment. His hand came up and closed around her wrist. Not tight, not controlling, just present. She straightened, picked up the leather case and put it in her jacket pocket. Slowly, she said. Slowly, he agreed. She went back to her desk. He watched her sit down and open the next brief with the focused attention of a woman who has never once in her professional life allowed the personal to eclipse the work. He watched her for a moment. Then he smiled, small, private, the expression she had only ever seen when he was not performing control but simply was himself, and went back to his own work. Between them, through the office walls and the summer afternoon, Micah's running commentary continued its cheerful, indifferent report on a world that contained floors to pound and acoustics to investigate, and absolutely nothing worth being afraid of. The afternoon light came through the window and lay across the desk between them, and neither of them moved out of it. It was the most ordinary thing in the world. It had cost them everything to get here. It was enough.